I want to go ahead and start jumping in. And so today's mastermind topic is going to be about buyer brokerage agreements. But I have some kind of cursory information, and I'm going to talk about, the three-step process that you should go through in order to get your buyer brokerage agreement signed, and the right way to do it. I do want to start off by talking about some different things happening inside our industry and how that's impacting us and what we see kind of going on. And so there was a recent study where it talked about where they were polling agents. And one of the big questions, or not, but one of the questions that they asked agents out there was, how has the NAR settlement impacted your business? And so roughly like 56% said it wasn't a big deal. Almost 40% though said it negatively affected their business. Also, at the same time, 5% said that it positively affected their business. And so there's a lot of folks that feel like the NAR settlement was a real negative for real estate, a negative for agents. Now, the next follow-up question that they did was, well, since the NAR settlement effects or settlement changes took effect, have you noticed any change in your compensation, in your commission? And so almost 20% said that it was that far more. Some people said it was a little more. The largest group of agents actually said it was about the same, that kind of thing. Uh, what's actually very interesting about that is at the same time, we've seen that because that's one thing that's kind of near and dear to my heart. And I want to make sure that, has the settlement impacted agent compensation? And, like a year ago, or I'm sorry, 2 years ago, the average agent compensation, especially on the buyer side, the buyer agent compensation was 2.65%. That was just kind of the national average. And so right now it's 2.59%. It's down 0.06 of a percent. So it's not what I call earth-shattering changes. But however, with the rise that we've had in property values, it's really no change at all. We're not seeing any real drastic change. As a matter of fact, we've seen where compensation for agents who are listing, who are representing buyers that are buying homes under $500,000, their compensation has actually gone up. And so the reason I want to talk about that is because I'm seeing where a lot of folks are taking one of the, some of the things from the NAR settlement, in particular, the fact that we have to have a buyer brokerage agreement signed prior to showing, as a big negative. I don't see it as a negative. Matter of fact, I see it kind of the exact opposite. Um, Before I get into the actual process for getting your buyer brokerage agreement signed, I do want to talk about an additional study that was done. And so this was a study done of consumers, of buyers and sellers. And so what was different about this study that they did was this study, they went out and said, what are the top three ways that you would describe your perfect realtor, the best agent out there? And the three words that they used to describe the best agent was patient, knowledgeable, and transparent. And I think it's very important that we take that into account when we start thinking about how we're going to get our buyer brokerage agreements signed. So like when it comes to being patient, you know, did your agent take time with you? Was the approach, look, we'll find a solution. You're in good hands. We've got this. Someone that doesn't have compensation breath, right? Were you knowledgeable? I have experience in handling situations like this. I know what I'm doing. I have a process that we follow. And then are you transparent? Are you putting everything right up front? Are you discussing, the good, the bad, the ugly, with your clients as you go through? And so at the same time, the number one negative trait that our consumers felt about the real estate profession was lack of responsiveness, which is really funny because most of the time I hear where agents are like, it's not, like oh, they don't answer. A lot of us don't want to call. but yet lack of responsiveness is the number one thing that our clients would like to see from us. So my current situation here is that I feel that a lot of agents are blaming NAR. And I get it. A lot of folks don't like change. I don't think anyone likes change, but that's one thing that's going to happen in our industry no matter what. You may not like change, but change is coming no matter what. We know that one of the big things from this NAR settlement was that we have to have a buyer brokerage agreement signed prior to showing. And personally, I think this is really, really good. I know that there's a lot of folks, and you may have some folks on, we may have folks on here that don't think that that's good. But see, for me, we are now starting to treat our buyers the way that we have sellers for ages. If I had a seller, I would prepare my listing presentation. I would prepare a comparative market analysis. I would have, 2 copies of my listing agreement and my seller disclosure forms. I would have everything I needed, and I would set an appointment with that seller, and I would go to that seller's house, and we would walk through, and I'd build rapport and trust. I'd also show my expertise. At some point, we're going to sit down. I'm going to go through, these are all the services I provide. This is how I'm going to help sell your home for the most money in the shortest amount of time possible. And then at the end of that, we're going to get a listing agreement signed. And see, for buyers in the past, it's always been see it too, right? And there's a big disconnect there, right? We're going to go through all this formal process, and we're going to build trust and rapport with our sellers. But with buyers, it's just been so much more of like, it's very easy to kind of think that we're okay with regulating ourselves to just being a door opener. And that's a dangerous place for us to be. That's where Zillow wants us to be, and all these other companies, right? Because they want to sell us the leads, and then they just want us to open the door and then pay them a big piece of our compensation. That's not where I want to be, and I don't think that's where anyone really wants to be at the end of the day. But if all we're doing is just standing in the doorway, blocking access unless they sign a piece of paper, if all we're good for is opening a door, that's the demise of the real estate industry if we're not very, very careful in there. So first thing I need to make sure that we're doing is we have to adopt a better mindset, right? This is one of those where if we'll accept the fact that like this is the way that we're going to do business moving forward, that we are going to be in a much better place. Now, here's the funny thing. Newer agents are adopting this so much easier and so much faster than we'll go with seasoned veterans, right? It's the seasoned veterans that are having the biggest problem with this, because this was not how you grew up doing real estate. This was not how and I get it. Back in the day, I didn't get buyer brokerage agreements signed that often. I mean, we'd have it signed before we submitted the contract. But I just wasn't that worried about it. It wasn't that big a deal. Now, I'm not saying I didn't spend time and educate and train my clients, but by the same token, a lot of the old school folks, like we just didn't do it before. So it's not part of our process and how we want to do it. You have to also understand that having a buyer brokerage agreement signed prior to showing, protects buyer's agents. This is one of the biggest reasons why we haven't seen buyer agent compensation go down. Because if you just left buyer agent compensation in the hands of the seller, what would happen with our compensation? I mean, I'm just being straight up, because from the seller's point of view, it's like, you represent that buyer over there. And if the seller gets to choose how much you get paid, they may not choose to pay you at all, right? And so the process of having a buyer brokerage agreement signed by your buyer, that is a huge protection to us. So we had one of our agents represented a buyer. She's worked with this buyer for a number of years. Sold her kids' homes, that kind of stuff. But this buyer truly did value our agent. They go and they submit an offer on a property, and the seller in our offer, they request that the seller covers In this instance, 3% compensation for our agent. The seller comes, or the seller comes back and counters back and says, no, we're only paying 2%. So my buyer says, okay, we're going to walk. And the seller comes back and says, well, hold on. What do you mean you're going to walk? It's like, no, if I have to come out of pocket for that extra percent, that for me, that's something I have to come out of pocket, right? This is an affordability issue for our buyer when we have a buyer brokerage agreement signed. That buyer is on the hook to cover our compensation. They don't have to fund it necessarily, but they're on the hook to cover our compensation. Now, in this particular instance, that seller had already had an agreement with their listing agent that they were going to pay 4% total compensation. So we come back and say, look, if you want to do it, then my buyer does not want to come out of pocket. We need you to cover 3% compensation for, to cover the buyer's agent's fees. And this listing agent was really, really angry because the listing agent had been the one that negotiated with the seller to say, look, 4%, and we're just going to offer 2%. They can take it or leave it. Well, our buyer was fine to leave it if they didn't want to do that. So the seller came back and said, look, I told you 4%. So the listing agent got 1% and our agent got 3%. She was protected because she had a buyer brokerage agreement because her client saw the value that she brought to the transaction. So understand that buyer brokerage agreements are not a bad thing. They protect us. It also, when you look at the issues that we were talking about before, as far as like, transparency, that's one thing that a lot of our buyers and sellers, for that matter, don't understand a lot of times with real estate. Who's paying who gets compensated, what's going on behind the curtains. Like when we have a buyer brokerage agreement signed by our clients, there is there is transparency at that point. So we really do need to address that. So my basic outline here for how I get a buyer brokerage signed, there's 3 steps. First step is going to be set an appointment. Second step is going to be use a buyer's presentation. Third is be patient and close. And so let's kind of go into those, what those really look like and how we're going to kind of do that moving forward. So step 1 is that this is a new mindset. Yes, we have to get it signed. This is good. But in order to do that, we have to start setting appointments with our buyers. It's no more like see it too kind of thing. It's, can you come into the office? Can I meet you at Chick-fil-A? The whole idea is that we have to start treating our buyers the way we have sellers. We would not just show up half-cocked on a listing presentation. It's the exact same kind of thing where we have to sit down and set an appointment, right? There's a new state law in Alabama, which is actually banning buyer brokerage agreements. And largely because so many people in Alabama, at least my personal feeling is folks in Alabama were doing it wrong. They were using a buyer brokerage agreement as a hammer, a way to beat a buyer into submission. Want to see this house? Sign this piece of paper. Oh, you're not going to sign the paper? Well, then I'm not going to show you the house. And so the state has come back and said, look, you can't force somebody to sign a piece of paper that they're going to pay you in order to see this property. So in Alabama, they're having a change of state law is going to supersede the NAR settlement. So, in Alabama, they don't have to get buyer brokerage agreements signed. But I think that's a negative for them, right? Because when you get that buyer brokerage agreement signed, we already talked about it, you're going to have a lot more protections for you, and you're also going to have a better educated consumer. So we don't want to be the kind of people that are standing in a doorway being like, hey, if you sign this, I'll let you see the house. There are some instances where maybe you get put in that position. And if that is the case, then you can do a short-term buyer brokerage agreement. Please don't do showing agreements like Zillow and a bunch of other companies will give you these blank showing agreements, which basically says, I'm just here to open the door. I won't answer any questions and you don't owe me anything. This is your chance to build some rapport and hopefully build a relationship with them. Do a short-term buyer brokerage agreement, only on this property, only for a day, only for a week, that kind of thing. So that if you have not yet built trust, that's one of the big things. We have to build trust. But to go back to this, it's a mindset change that we are setting appointments with buyers. It just has to be the way that we change our process and how we handle dealing with buyers. We have to lead with the appointment. Oh, okay, you're ready to start buying? When can we sit down? Right? And so we have to have this expectation that there's going to be an appointment before a showing. And this is our chance to be able to show knowledge, expertise. This is how we're going to better represent you throughout the transaction. This is how we're going to provide value. It's going to be lead with the appointment, and it has to be just the way that you have to change the way that you're doing business. I'm here to advise, guide, educate you. Our market is always changing. I want you to go into a transaction knowing exactly what you're getting into. I don't want you to buy a home and feel like you don't know what's going on. We need to sit down before we actually show up at a house. And so some folks will say, well, it seems like a lot of hassle. I'm not saying that it isn't more work. I'm saying that if you sit down with a buyer and you go through the entire process with them and you explain your value and you explain these are all the services I provide, these are the fees I charge, and you get a buyer brokerage agreement signed, guess what? That's a buyer that closes. We spend a lot of time, at least in the past, we would spend tons of time driving to houses, opening the door, and they'd be like, thanks, bye, Felicia. And they're just gone because there's no relationship in there. And so if you want to be a door opener, you can still do that. It's not going to be healthy for our industry and it's not going to be a good move for you. You're just going to spend a lot of time kind of driving back and forth and getting really frustrated. So, step one, absolutely set an appointment. Now, step two, use the presentation. If you have a buyer's presentation, great. If not, steal ours. You can go into max1.rocks/buyers. A lot of the other franchisees have them as well. They may have a different one, but for me, if you want to, you can just go to max1.rocks/buyers. That is where our buyer's presentation is. You are more than welcome to steal that thing all day long if you want, or use the one that your broker is providing, or use your own. The whole idea here is that you have a process. Like winging it is not a system. That's not how we're going to move forward. That's not how you're going to show any kind of expertise. It's just going to show up, with a breath mint, be like, all right, here we go. You need to have a process that you're going to follow. We have to stop just being gunslingers and just kind of like, woo, whatever. We're just going to take it as we go. It's like you can't be consistent that way. You're going to miss things. You're going to forget things. When you have a process and a system that you follow, then that's where you start getting into repeatable results here. So my first step is have a presentation. Now, in addition to having the presentation, you need to practice it. You need to role play it. Use your husbands, your wives, your friends, your kids. I don't care. Practice it on everybody because you need to be smooth like butter. Okay. You just need to be able to go through the whole thing because throughout the whole process, we want to explain what it's like to buy a home, right? It's not rocket science by any means on there. But if you'll just follow your buyer's presentation, it really is not that difficult, right? You use a buyer's presentation more as a placeholder, right? It's so that you don't miss anything. I would never expect that you would go in and do a buyer's presentation and then just read the whole thing for them start to finish. That's not what we're talking about, right? But once you do have a buyer's presentation and you get it dialed in, you become very, very competent. Because remember before what we were talking about, right? Like what do they want from us? They want us to be patient, knowledgeable, and transparent. So that's what they're looking for from us. So when we go through and we have our presentation and we use our presentation and we're very confident in everything that we're saying and we have a system, we are being knowledgeable and transparent. And this is going to be so important for us moving forward. So please remember here that like the whole process of doing this is this is your chance to show professionalism and to provide value. We have to educate and provide value right up front. The other thing that I do as part of having a presentation is we also prepare buyer folders. And it's so simple. There's really not much to it. So I have a blue maximum one folder, has 2 copies of my buyer brokerage agreement, has some of my business cards in there. A lot of times I'll just go through the marketing area, and all of our offices have those marketing areas. Just go through there, steal a bunch of vendor flyers and postcards and things like that that you can give them to provide them services, have contact information for your lenders and all that kind of stuff in there. Because when you show up and you've got, here's a folder, has my buyer brokerage agreements in it, here's my buyer's presentation. We sit down, I go through the entire process, start to finish, right? At this point, I came prepared to play the game. They know that they're dealing with a professional. They know that someone that is knowledgeable and experienced in what's going on. Even if you're a brand new agent, straight out of school, and you come in and you've got a folder, a presentation, and you're very smooth in what's going on, they don't turn around and be like, man, you must be new. No, that doesn't happen, right? Because you came prepared, right? Also, remember that when you actually sit down and meet with your client, you aren't selling a house. You're selling you, right? You're selling your services, your knowledge, your expertise, right? And so this is not the home selling. I mean, this is a home selling process, but at the end of the day, you are selling you. Now, one of the biggest questions that's going to hit you when you're doing your buyer brokerage agreement is who pays compensation. And so at the end of the day, the buyer pays compensation. That's one of the big also mindset changes that a lot of agents have to get by. The buyer pays the buyer's agent compensation. Now, who funds the buyer's agent compensation? Well, lots of things that we could use. We have lots of opportunities in there about who pays, who funds the compensation, because it doesn't have to be the buyer. It could be the seller. It could be used as part of closing costs. We have a lot of different options for who could be that, that who could fund that the compensation on there. But understand that that's going to be one of the biggest questions that you have asked of you is like, okay, who's going to pay for this? And so when we say, look, these are all the services I provide, these are the fees that I charge. Yes, you are going to be compensated for me, but in order for me to negotiate this compensation, I have to have a signed agreement, right? I have to be able to negotiate on your behalf to get it covered in these other ways if you don't want to come out of pocket for it. But my services aren't free. I work really hard for what I do. And these are the services I provide. These are the fees that I charge. Like with this, you are coming across and you as being really, really transparent. No more of this, you don't work, you don't have to pay me. Like that was such a terrible thing that I mean, and agents for years did the whole, like, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you don't owe me anything. The seller pays me. And that sends a terrible message to the buyer because you know what? Whoever pays is the person who controls the thing. And if there's no value in there for what you do, what do you really bring into the transaction? So yes, the way our contracts are written now, the buyer is on the hook. And so we need to be very clear and concise about that we get paid based on our agreement with our buyer. Now, if your buyer agrees, or if you agree to work for 7 bananas and the seller's offering you 10 bananas, tough tooties, you have an agreement that you're only going to get paid 7 bananas during this transaction because the buyer is the one who's going to pay you. It's going to be paid out of that. From the buyer. Now, we may fund it different ways, but it's going to get paid from the buyer. And yes, we can amend a buyer brokerage agreement, but I'm just saying that's what has to be agreed to. If that buyer doesn't agree to paying you more, then there is no additional compensation for you at that point. So at the end of the day, we set our appointment. We actually sit down with our clients. We go through our buyer presentation and just kind of explain the whole process. In doing this, we're showing off our knowledge, we're showing off our professionalism, our expertise. We go through the whole thing, and then we have to be ready to um, like answer any question, because step three is really about being patient and closing. You're going to have to close at some point, but before you get there, you have to be patient. Like, on average, the average person moves every 8 to 10 years. This is not something that they do every day. A lot of folks this is generally speaking, the largest purchase that they're going to make in their life. For some folks, this is going to be changing their family's futures and outcomes. Like I love being able to help someone that has never owned a home previously to own a home. Like, you just changed that entire family for generations. I mean, because you're helping them create generational wealth. That's a really important thing. And so in doing that, now is not the time to go for the hard sell. Now's the time to sit back and be really patient, right? Because you don't want your shoulders all raised up. You don't want to get you want to be chill. You want to be easy. This should be a no stress situation. If you're creating stress, this is just not a good situation for you to be with your clients, right? Now's the time to let them ask questions. Keep asking them, do you have any questions? Are there any concerns? What are you worried about? These kind of things. You want to give them a lot of opportunity to ask questions. You have to be ready to handle objections. If you're listed, I mean, if your buyer's presentation is dialed in really well, though, most of your objections should have been handled already. But there's always some questions that's going to come about. You just don't want to rush straight to, okay, here's sign this piece of paper. We have to take some time to say, look, remember, this is one of the biggies about what they want from a real estate professional, right? So they need us to be knowledgeable, they need us to be patient, and they need us to be transparent. Now is the time for patience. Now is the time not to go for the hard sell out there. Again, we also have to be ready that now may not be the right time, and that's okay, right? This is about them. This is not about you. This is not about your paycheck. This is not about how much you're going to get paid. This is not the time to have commission breath, right? Now it's the time where even if they aren't, let's say now isn't the right time. At some point, it's going to be the right time, and you're going to need a transaction then too. So now is not the time to be pushy, because honestly, at the end of the day, they're not going to do it anyway. So again, patience is going to be the big key here on there. As part of the close, we want them to understand this is a benefit for them. Now, a lot of folks will be like, what? But no, this is a benefit for my buyer, right? Because I can't negotiate on your behalf if I don't have a signed agreement. Without that signed agreement, I can't negotiate for you. I can't get the other party to pay the compensation to all those kind of things. I don't do that without a signed agreement. Also, this is not our rule, right? We all have to follow this rule, right? We all have to have a signed buyer brokerage agreement prior to showing property. Like, this is a legit thing, right? This is what we're doing. And you can say, well, I'm not a realtor, I don't have to do that. However, the rule changes are with the MLSs. It's the MLSs that have adopted these rule changes, not necessarily whether you're a realtor or not. So it's still one of those things, you have to do it. Now, before I ask for a client's commitment to me, I want to make a commitment to them. I want to show them my heart. I want to go through and explain, these are all the services I provide. These are the fees that I charge in here. But this is why I'm the best person to help you achieve your goals. Right. And so that's what I need to come across here, right? I'm here with you. I'm going to be with you through the entire process. I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to take care of all these issues. I'm on your side. I'm committed to you. I need to know that you're committed to me. I'm here all the way through the whole process, but I can't do this unless I have a signed agreement from you. Again, once we've gone through and we've set an appointment, we've gone through and we've done our entire presentation, and then we've been very patient with them, we're really covering those big three: patience, knowledgeable, transparent. Those are, the really big kicker items that we are really trying to make sure comes across. And this is where value comes. Now, for me personally, anytime that we've sat down, made an appointment, sat down, gone through and explained the whole process, we don't have anyone that has a hard time getting our buyer presentation signed. It's one of those where it continues to be a much easier process that everyone really understands. Like we get thanked for explaining how real estate works, how things are going on, especially our young buyers, first time buyers. When you can provide that much value right up front, and you talk about all the things that you do, they're like, oh wow, I didn't even know that was that many things. So that's my process, or my 3-step process for how we get buyer brokerage agreements signed.